The heat in Oakhaven was not merely a meteorological event, it was a physical presence. By mid-July, it settled into the valley like a stray dog and refused to leave. Panting against the windows of the great houses that lined River Road, it was a thick, humid blanket that smelled of slow-moving water, baking asphalt, and the overly sweet, decaying scent of jasmine that choked the trellises of Alina Vance's ancestral home. At 42, Alina had come to resemble the house she inhabited, elegant in a faded, overlooked way, sturdy, and entirely defined by her function. The house was referred to in town as the Old Vance Place, rarely by its actual name, Briarwood. Similarly, Alina was rarely referred to as a botanical illustrator or a woman in her prime. She was Caroline's sister, or the sensible aunt, or, most frequently, the keeper of the flame for a family that had long since moved on to brighter, airier spaces. Her life was a study in precision, lived under glass. Her studio, a converted sunroom on the east side of the house, was her sanctuary. Here, she spent hours hunched over a drafting table, magnifying glass in hand, translating the chaotic sprawl of nature into disciplined watercolor plates for university textbooks. She cataloged root systems, painstakingly rendered the serrated edges of rare ferns, and documented the minute reproductive organs of orchids. It was safe work. The plants on her table were dead, pressed, or obediently potted. They did not demand anything other than an accurate accounting of their parts. The rest of her life was equally categorized. Tuesday mornings were for groceries in town. Thursday evenings were for a long, solitary telephone call with her older sister, Caroline, who lived a frenetic, high-society life in Atlanta and treated Alina like a particularly reliable personal assistant who lived 3 states away. "Did you remember to send the check for Mother's memorial garden upkeep?" Caroline had barked last Thursday, over the sound of a clinking martini glass. "Yes, Caroline, 2 weeks ago. Good, and Julian is still coming next Friday. You've prepared the East Room. He's allergic to down feathers, remember?" "I remember. The synthetic duvet is on the bed. God, I hope you can snap him out of this funk." Alina, 5 years of architecture school, top of his class, and he wants to take a sabbatical before he even starts his first job. It's indulgent, he just needs some fresh air and some chores. Put him to work on that dreadful greenhouse Dad loved so much. "I will," Alina had said, her voice a flat line. She had hung up the phone and looked around the silent, high-ceilinged parlor. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. She had spent her 20s and 30s here, nursing first her father through a long, agonizing slide into dementia, and then her mother through terminal cancer. She had held the hands, administered the morphine, changed the sheets, and absorbed the grief so Caroline didn't have to interrupt her dinner parties. When they were gone, she had simply stayed. It was easier than figuring out who she was outside of these walls. She had become a ghost in her own life, haunting the hallways of Briarwood, efficient, reliable, and entirely invisible, until the Tuesday before Julian arrived. The heat had made her reckless. She had driven into the next town over, seeking an air-conditioned reprieve, and wandered into a small, expensive boutique she had never patronized. She was looking for sensible linen trousers, beige, preferably, or perhaps a daring olive green. Instead, she found the dress. It was hanging alone on a rack near the window, catching the ruthless afternoon sun. It was emerald green silk, not a polite, muted moss green, but a vibrant, jewel-toned scream of color. It was sleeveless, with a neckline that plunged just deep enough to suggest a secret, and a skirt cut on the bias so it rippled like water when it moved. It was a dress for a woman who drank champagne on balconies at midnight. It was a dress for a woman who was touched. It was absolutely not a dress for Alina Vance. She bought it. The transaction felt illicit. The young salesgirl, with impeccable makeup and judgmental eyes, had raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow as Alina handed over her credit card. The price was obscene. For 3 days, the dress hung on the outside of her heavy oak wardrobe door, still in its garment bag. It hung there like an accusation. Every time she walked past it, she felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach, a mix of shame and a strange, hot excitement. It was a mistake, a midlife crisis purchased in silk. On Friday, the heatwave broke records. The air was so heavy it felt hard to draw into the lungs. Alina spent the day cleaning the guest room for Julian, sweating through her t-shirt as she dusted baseboards that no one else would ever notice. She still pictured Julian as he had been at 16, a gangly, quiet boy with charcoal smudges on his fingers, hiding in her library during family reunions because he found his mother's energy overwhelming. He was safe. He was family. He was a boy who needed a quiet place to rest. By 5 o'clock, Alina felt grime coated on her skin. She showered in tepid water, trying to lower her body temperature. She toweled dried her hair, intending to pull it back into its usual severe knot. She stood naked before the tarnished cheval mirror in her bedroom. At 42, her body surprised her. It was not the soft, spreading thing she imagined it to be. Years of gardening, of hauling soil and mulch, had given her defined arms and a strong back. Her waist was still narrow, her hips curving gently, but she rarely looked. She covered it in oversized linen, hiding the architecture beneath the drapes. Her eyes moved to the garment bag hanging on the wardrobe. Why not? A voice whispered inside her. A dangerous, unfamiliar voice. Just for tonight. Just for you. Before you put the armor back on. With trembling hands, she unzipped the bag. The silk felt cool and fluid against her skin as she stepped into it. The zipper slid up her spine with a satisfying hiss. She turned back to the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. The emerald silk clung to her. Ribs and flowed over her hips. It made her hazel eyes snap with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. Her collarbones, usually hidden by high necklines, looked sharp and elegant. The dress didn't just cover her, it announced her. She couldn't wear her usual sensible flats with this. She rummaged in the back of her closet and found a pair of cork wedges she'd bought 5 years ago for a wedding and never worn since. They added 3 inches to her height, changing her center of gravity, making her walk with a conscious sway. She didn't tie her hair up. She let it dry in the heat, falling in loose, damp waves around her bare shoulders. She looked ridiculous. She looked incredible. Heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She walked downstairs. The old wood of the staircase creaked under the unfamiliar shoes. She felt exposed, as if she were walking naked through the house. She poured herself a glass of iced tea laced with mint from the garden and stepped out onto the wide, wraparound veranda. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the western ridge, casting long, violet shadows across the overgrown lawn. The cicadas were just starting their evening sonic assault, a rising buzz that vibrated in her teeth. She sat in one of the wicker chairs, careful not to snag the silk. She would sit here for 10 minutes. She would feel the hot breeze on her bare arms. And then, before Julian arrived, she would go upstairs, take off the ridiculous dress, put on her beige linen trousers, and go back to being Alina. She closed her eyes, tipping her head back against the chair, letting the heat wash over her. She didn't hear the car turn off the main road. The first warning she had was the crunch of gravel on the winding driveway. Her eyes snapped open. She checked her watch. He was an hour early. Taut panic, cold and sharp, sliced through the heat. There was no time to change. She was trapped on the veranda in emerald silk. A battered, dust-covered SUV pulled up to the portico. The engine cut, and the silence that followed seemed sudden and loud. The driver's side door opened, and a pair of worn work boots hit the gravel. Alina stood up, her hands gripping the veranda railing. She prepared the welcoming smile, the maternal greeting for the gangly, overwhelmed boy. She remembered. The man who stepped out of the car was not a boy. Julian had filled out. The lanky limbs of adolescence had hardened into broad shoulders and lean muscle, evident beneath a t-shirt damp with sweat from the drive. His jawline, once soft, was now defined, covered in a few days of dark stubble. He had his mother's slate blue eyes, but none of her frantic energy. He moved with a weary, deliberate grace that spoke of exhaustion. He slung a duffel bag over his shoulder, slammed the car door, and looked up at the house. His eyes found her on the veranda, and stopped dead. Alina stopped breathing. Julian didn't give her the polite, skimming glance of a nephew greeting an aunt. His eyes widened, taking in the whole picture in a single, arresting sweep. The emerald dress against the peeling white paint of the veranda. The bare shoulders, the loose hair, the wedges. It wasn't a lecherous look. It was something far more disarming. It was a look of total, unfiltered surprise, followed by an intense, almost painful curiosity. It was the look a man gives a woman. Alina felt a blush rise from her chest, burning up her neck to her hairline. The silk suddenly felt too thin, too tight. She fought the urge to cross her arms over her chest, to hide. Alina. His voice was deeper than she recalled, roughened by hours on the road. He didn't say Aunt Elena, just her name. It sounded different in his mouth. It sounded like a question. Julian, she managed. Her own voice was tighter than she intended, brittle. You made good time. I wasn't expecting you for another hour. He walked slowly toward the steps, dropping his duffel bag at the bottom. He didn't stop looking at her. His expression was a complicated mix of familiarity trying to reconcile with sudden strangeness. Yeah, beat the refinery traffic out of the city. He paused on the top step. He was tall. In her wedges, she was usually taller than most, but he still had 2 inches on her. The air between them, already thick with humidity, suddenly felt charged, vibrating with unsaid things. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes traveling over the silk again. "You look incredible." The compliment landed heavily in the humid air. It wasn't the polite, "you look nice" of family gatherings. It was direct. It stripped her of her usual poise. "Oh, this old thing," she lied, the words tumbling out fast and breathy. She waved a dismissive hand, nearly spilling her tea. "Just trying to stay cool in this humidity. It's unbearable, isn't it? You must be exhausted. Come in, I have cold supper waiting." She turned and fled into the house, painfully aware of the sway of the silk skirt against her legs, and the weight of his slate blue eyes following her every move into the shadows of the hall. Part 2. The hot the dinner was excruciating. Alina had set the small table at the end of the cavernous kitchen, trying to make it cozy, but the space felt overwhelming. They ate cold roasted chicken, potato salad, and sliced heirloom tomatoes that still tasted of the sun's simple, summer fare. Julian seemed too tired to talk much at first. He ate with a focused hunger, soaking in the stillness of the old house. But his silence wasn't passive, it was watchful. Every time Alina looked up from her plate, she found him looking at her across the table. And every time she caught his gaze, he didn't look away immediately. He held it for a beat too long, a second of acknowledgement that made her heart perform an anxious, irregular rhythm against her ribs. She felt ridiculously overdressed in the casual kitchen, the silk gleaming under the overhead lights. She felt like a fraud in a costume. "How is your mother?" Alina asked, desperation creeping into her voice as she tried to steer the evening back onto safe, familial ground. Julian grimaced slightly as he reached for the water pitcher. "Intense. She's currently vibrating at a frequency that shatters glass. She's already planning my wedding to a senator's daughter I haven't met yet, and I haven't even started the new job. I needed to escape the itinerary she has planned for my life." Alina smiled, a genuine, weary empathy surfacing through her anxiety. "Caroline has always enjoyed planning other people's lives. She means well. She just wants you to be secure, does she?" Julian questioned, his tone dry. He leaned back in his chair, one arm resting on the oak table. His hand was large, long-fingered, an architect's hand, capable of drawing precise lines. "Or does she just want me to fit the picture she's drawn? You escaped it. Mostly, by staying here, buried in the woods." "I didn't escape," Alina corrected gently, looking down at her plate. "I just chose a different kind of duty. Someone had to look after the house. And Mom and Dad. It wasn't a choice, really. It was just what was next." Julian went quiet. He stopped eating and studied her. "Yeah, you did the heavy lifting. As usual." And everyone else just went on with their lives because Alina was handling it. The acknowledgement was unexpected. It was sharp and strangely validating. Usually, the family took her martyrdom for granted. It was just what Alina did, like the refrigerator humming or the roof keeping the rain out. "It was fine, Julian. It was what was needed. I don't regret it." The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "That's what you always say." He reached for his water glass again. The table was small. As his hand moved, it brushed hers where it rested on the tablecloth near the tomato platter. It was the barest of touches. A grazing of skin, his warm, slightly rough knuckles against the side of her hand. Yet, Alina felt a jolt of electricity shoot up her arm so sharp she almost gasped aloud. She froze, staring at their hands, which were now sitting inches apart on the white linen. Julian didn't pull back instantly. He let his hand hover near hers for a second that stretched into an agonizing eternity, the air vibrating between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his hand and took a drink. When he lowered the glass, his eyes were softer, darker than before. "You seem different tonight, Alina," he said quietly. The observation felt intimate, invasive. She forced a bright, brittle laugh that sounded nothing like herself. "Different? Don't be silly. I'm just older, Julian. 4 years is a long time. I have more gray hairs." He shook his head slowly, his gaze pinning her. "No, it's not that. You seem, lighter, like you're not holding the roof up for 5 minutes. It suits you." Elena's throat tightened so severely she couldn't swallow. She didn't know how to respond to being truly seen, especially by someone who wasn't supposed to see her at all. It felt dangerous. It felt like standing on a cliff edge in a high wind. "I'm tired," she stated abruptly, scraping her chair back and standing up to clear the plates. The movement was jerky, desperate. "And you must be too. The guest room is ready. We can discuss the greenhouse in the morning." She escaped to the kitchen sink, turning the water on full blast, running it loudly to drown out the sound of the blood rushing in her ears. When Alina woke the next morning, the sun was already beating against her closed curtains, heating the room. The emerald dress lay in a heap on her floor like a shed skin. The previous night felt like a fever dream. The oppressive humidity, the slide of the silks, the look in Julian's eyes when he stepped out of the car. Reality reasserted itself with the cruel clarity of the morning light. She was 42. He was her nephew. The very thought of the tension she had felt, the electricity of that accidental touch, was absurd. It was bordering on grotesque. She was lonely, that was all. She was projecting things that weren't there. She needed to reset the dynamic immediately. She needed to remind him, and herself, of who they were to each other. She went to her closet and bypassed the colorful blouses she sometimes wore into town. She reached for her armor, a pair of oversized, beige linen overalls that she wore for heavy gardening. They were shapeless, stiff, and utterly practical. Underneath, she wore a faded cotton t-shirt that had once belonged to her father. She went to the bathroom and pulled her thick, dark hair back into a severe, practical knot, securing it with pins until her scalp ached slightly. No loose tendrils, no softness. She looked in the mirror. The sensible aunt stared back. No makeup, no silk, just function. Good. She went downstairs and out the back door, heading through the overgrown garden toward the greenhouse. Julian was already there. He was standing before the ruin of the Victorian glass structure at the very bottom of the slope. It had once been the jewel of Briarwood, her father's pride and joy, filled with exotic orchids and citrus trees. Now, after 15 years of neglect, it was a wreckage of iron and glass. Aggressive ivy had choked out the light, thick vines winding through broken panes like constrictor snakes. The interior was a dense jungle of weeds and brambles that reached the roof. Julian was wearing work boots, old jeans, and a gray t-shirt already damp with sweat in the oppressive 9 a.m. heat. He had a sketchbook open in his hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. Alina approached, her boots crunching heavily in the high grass. "Morning," she called out, her voice brisk, efficient, the voice of a woman with a clipboard. "It's a disaster, isn't it? Mom wanted to tear it down years ago, but I couldn't bear to. I almost told you not to bother when Caroline suggested it. It's likely beyond saving." Julian looked up from his sketchpad. He took in the sight of Hertha's shapeless beige overalls, the severe hair, the no-nonsense expression. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It was a smile that infuriated Alina instantly. "Morning," he replied easily, closing the sketchbook. "It's not beyond saving. It's got good bones." They worked mostly in silence. It was physical, punishing labor. They ripped down decades of thick, dusty ivy, wrestling with brambles that snagged their clothes and scratched their skin through their shirts. They hauled out rotted wooden benches and rusted potting tables. Alina worked with a fury, channeling all her anxiety and confusion into manual labor. She tore at roots with a vengeance. She hated that she was hyper-aware of Julian's presence in the confined space. She hated that she noticed the way his back muscles bunched under his soaking wet t-shirt when he leveraged a heavy root from the ground. She hated that she knew exactly where he was even when her back was turned, sensing his proximity by the heat radiating off him. By noon, they were both drenched and filthy, covered in soil and plant sap. Alina called a halt, her breath coming in short gasps. She grabbed 2 water bottles from the cooler she'd brought down and tossed one to Julian. She sat down on an overturned wooden crate, wiping dirt and sweat from her forehead with the back of her gloved hand. Her hair had escaped its severe knot in several places, hanging in damp tendrils around her face. Julian leaned against a central iron support beam opposite her, drinking deeply from his water bottle. He lowered it, breathing hard, his chest heaving. He looked at her, disheveled, dirty, sweating in her oversized overalls, with that same intensity he had looked at her in the silk dress. "You know," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "you can wear the overalls. Alina, you can tie your hair back until your scalp bleeds. You can cover yourself in dirt." Alina stiffened, the water bottle halfway to her mouth. "Excuse me." He pushed off the beam and took a step closer. The air in the greenhouse suddenly felt too thin to breathe, the scent of disturbed earth overwhelming. "It doesn't change what I saw last night," he said quietly. "You can't unring that bell." Alina stood up abruptly, her heart hammering. "I don't know what you're talking about. I dressed up for dinner. It was hot, that's all. Why are you so afraid of being noticed?" he asked gently, ignoring her denial. "You've spent your whole life making sure everyone else is okay, making sure you're the background noise so they can shine. Why is it so terrifying to take center stage for 5 minutes? You're projecting, Julian. This is about you and Carolyn, not me. You're projecting your desire to break free onto me. Isn't it about you? He crouched down slightly, so they were eye level, his gaze unwavering. I remember when I was 10, the last big reunion before Grandpa died. The house was chaos. Mom was crying in the kitchen about the catering. Uncles were arguing about money in the den. And you were just walking between the rooms, bringing tea, quieting people down, absorbing the grief and the stress so no one else had to drown in it. I saw you then, Alina. You were the only adult who seemed real to me, and I see you now. You're still doing it, hiding inside those overalls. Alina felt a stinging prick of tears behind her eyes. The accuracy of his memory, the fact that he had seen her when she thought she was invisible, was overwhelming. She blinked the tears back furiously. She would not cry in front of him. Not here. It's just who I am, she whispered, her voice trembling with the effort of holding it together. No, Julian said firmly. It's what you do. It's a role you play because it's safe. Who you are is the woman who bought that green dress because she's starving to feel something real, starving to be looked at. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow to the chest. It was unbearable. I need to go inside. Lunch, she choked out. She turned and fled the greenhouse, stumbling slightly on the uneven ground, running back toward the sanctuary of the house for the second time in 24 hours, leaving him standing in the ruin, watching her go. Over the next week, a strange, hypnotic rhythm developed at Briarwood. Despite her flight, Alina found herself back at the greenhouse the next morning, and the morning after that. The physical labor became a kind of dialogue between them. Safer than words. They learned how to move around each other in the tight, cluttered space. They anticipated